Video striking Ian Tomlinson during last year's G20 riots shortly before he died, but riot officer PC Simon Harwood will not be facing any criminal charges. The Crown Prosecution Service said there was no realistic prospect of a conviction because of irreconcilable differences between the pathologists who carried out the 3 post-mortems. Mr Tomlinson's family called it a cover-up and insists that they would challenge the decision not to prosecute. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Simon Israel.
This was the strike, the shove, the fall to the ground that will never be defined as a criminal act, not because of what the officer did to 47-year-old Ian Tomlinson, but because in part of what a pathologist failed to do after he died.
You just think that this guy's meant to, serve and protect people. He didn't serve and protect our dad that day. And we just don't feel we've got any justice at all.
For the last 15 months, the Crown Prosecution Service has wrestled with conflicting conclusions about just what caused the death of the news vendor as he was winding his way home through the maze of police cordons around the city's G20 demonstrations. This was where Mr Tomlinson collapsed and died, just round the corner from where he'd been hit. But the journey to the mortuary was to carry with it a huge assumption that his death was by natural causes. A request by the Independent Police Complaints Commission to attend the post-mortem was refused. Only Dr Freddie Patel and the coroner's officer were present. Dr Patel's findings were to have huge consequences for the prosecuting authorities. But it wasn't just his conclusions that were called into question, but his competence as well. And this was not the first time doubts had emerged about his abilities. Dr Patel's post-mortem was carried out without knowledge of the incident with the police officer. He said the death was consistent with natural causes and was due to coronary artery disease. 6 days later, Home Office pathologist Dr Nat Carey carried out a second post-mortem. He said the death was the result of abdominal hemorrhage from blunt force trauma to the abdomen, caused by Mr Tomlinson falling on his elbow after being shoved. 2 weeks later, pathologist Dr Kenneth Shorrock carried out a third post-mortem on behalf of the Metropolitan Police and the individual officer. He agreed with Dr Carey's conclusions.
In the face of this fundamental disagreement between the experts, the CPS embarked on a detailed and careful examination of all the medical evidence. Even after this extensive exercise, there remains an irreconcilable conflict between Dr Patel on the one hand and the other experts on the other as to the cause of death.
Dr Patel's initial notes, which the other pathologists had to work from, turned out to be less than precise. He suggested 3 litres of blood was found in Ian Tomlinson's abdomen, which would have been a significant indication of the cause of death. That was changed in a subsequent report to 3 litres of fluid, only some of which was blood. But the CPS said Dr Patel threw the fluid away and didn't keep a sample for testing, so there was no way of knowing just how much blood was there.
As a result, the CPS would simply not be able to prove beyond reasonable doubt that there was a causal link between Mr Tomlinson's death and the alleged assault upon him. That being the case, there is no realistic prospect of a conviction for unlawful act manslaughter.
All efforts are concentrated on how to bring the manslaughter charge against this officer, Unit 41, who we now know as PC Simon Harwood. So much so that the CPS went way past the 6-month limit on bringing a charge of common assault, even though today the DPP acknowledged there was a realistic prospect of conviction.
They knew what they were doing. They knew they dragged this out long enough. They can't go back on any lower charges. They exactly knew what they were doing. Dragged us out, pulled us through the edge backwards.
It's not the first time PC Harwood has been investigated for the alleged use of excessive force. While with Surrey Police, he was the subject of a complaint in 2004 that, after an internal inquiry, was found to be unsubstantiated. Dr Patel has also been the subject of an inquiry. In fact, he was under investigation by the General Medical Council over allegations of deficient professional performance when he carried out Mr Tomlinson's post-mortem. Since then, he's been placed on severe restrictions that bar him from any work for the Home Office or the police. Too late, Mr Tomlinson's family may say.
Simon Israel reporting. Earlier I spoke to the Tomlinson family and to their